Some things a man can let slip away. The first burn of whiskey on his tongue. The name of a buddy he put in the ground and mourned in his own way. Even the echo of his wife laughing through the kitchen window. But some things won't leave. Like the feel of a child going still in your arms. Jeb Carter hadn't said her name out loud in years. Lily, his little girl, 8 years old. A fever grabbed her and didn't let go. 2 nights. Nothing Jeb tried made a dent. He had worn a uniform. He knew how to live through bad times. But he wasn't a miracle worker. After she passed, he left Kansas behind. He rode toward the setting sun with no map, no plan, no reason except to get away from the sound of that cough stuck in his head. Arizona territory caught him at last, empty country, wide and quiet. He was more silent than the land itself. Then, on a regular day, with a sky like pale tin, he saw something that made his horse stop under a split mesquite. Something moved, slow and wrong. Not animal. Not man. A girl sat there, not lying down, hands tied, head hanging. A burlap sack covered her face, like someone wanted to rub her out of the world. No cry. No moan. At first, nothing. Then a whisper. Please don't take the sack off. No tremble in the words. Only tired in the bones, kinda tired. Like she had said that line 100 times. And no one ever listened. Jeb didn't rush. Didn't talk. He stood there with dust nibbling at his boots and looked at her like she was a grave not yet filled. Then he moved. He knelt and reached for the cloth. She flinched but didn't stop him. When he pulled it free, he saw a face beat up worse than his reflection on a bad day. Scars cut down one side. Skin split in spots. One eye swollen dark. The other open and empty. But it wasn't the cuts that cut him. It was that look. Not pain. Not fear. Just a quiet knowing. Like a girl who believes no one will see her and care. Jeb stared at her, and something inside him slid into place. Whatever she was under that sack, the world had tossed her aside. He wasn't about to do the same. The ride back, she said nothing. So did he. Jeb never pushed someone already wrung out by life. He took it slow. Let her lean when the trail rocked. Let the hush do its job. His cabin sat near a dry creek bed close to Ruby. Old wood. No neighbors. Just birds, wind, and time. When they stopped, he lifted her down, careful and light. She walked on her own, shaky but stubborn, like someone who forgot what help was. He held out water. She didn't drink. Offered bread. She turned her head. She found a corner instead, slipped the sack back over her face, and sat small, knees to her chest like the walls were still moving in. Jeb didn't push. He set a bowl on the table and went outside. He split wood like he always did. Same rhythm. Same thud. Only now one ear stayed tuned to the quiet behind him. At sunset, he stepped inside. The bowl was empty. The next morning, same thing. She wouldn't look at him. Wouldn't speak. But bread went missing. Then beans. Then coffee. Little things. Not enough to call trust. Enough to call hope. By the 3rd night, he left his old army coat near her corner. Next morning, it lay across her legs. She still wore the sack. But she sat straighter. Her breathing eased. You don't see changes like that unless you've watched someone give up before. Jeb had. Somewhere between sunrise and the 4th sunset, he stopped seeing a problem to fix and started seeing a person crawling back from a bad place. There's a moment with a scared animal when the shaking fades, and it meets your eyes for one heartbeat. Then you know you're close. When she finally looked at him like that, even with the sack still on, Jeb knew one thing for sure. She wasn't finished. He also knew if the quiet kept on, the truth would show up anyway. And truth can cut deeper than any blade. By the 5th day, she spoke more. Soft, steady, like a thin stream finding its path through a dry rock bed. Her stepfather's name came first, James Craig. Jeb didn't fish for it. The girl, Annie, said it while peeling potatoes, like she slipped poison into the pot by mistake. Her voice held steady. Her hands did not. She told it plain. After her mama died, James called her cursed. Said the mark on her face was a punishment sent from above. He locked her in. Then came the fists. Then worse. One day she ran. The town never asked why. They yelled, "Witch," and struck the matches. Jeb didn't say much. He nodded, stepped outside, and sat with coffee cooling in his palm. Something in him went still again, the kind of still that makes a man dangerous. Morning came. He hitched up his horse and told Annie he'd ride to Tombstone for supplies. She asked for nothing, just handed him the last of the flour and went back to chopping wood. Tombstone buzzed that day. Miners, traders, wanderers with eyes too tired to start trouble. Jeb entered the general store, gave the clerk a nod, and filled a basket with what his coins allowed. Then he heard it. 2 men by the oat sacks, laughing low, talking about a girl with a devil's face hiding up in the hills, saying the old fellow with her must be paying silver just to lay a hand on her. Jeb didn't look. He put the basket down, walked over slow and steady. When it was done, that oat sack held more red than grain. No one tried to stop him. No one said a word. He paid for bread and rode home, knuckles raw and singing. Annie didn't ask. She saw his hands and soaked a cloth in cold water. No speech, no fuss. Just held it on the cuts till they calmed. If breaking a jaw bought a circle of quiet, Jeb knew the true account hadn't come due yet. Sometimes justice isn't a speech. It's the hush that follows the pop of bone. If stories like this strike a chord, hit subscribe, because what's ahead will pull hard on what you call justice. It began with a whistle. Not a bird. Not the wind. A sharp 2-note call. The kind men use to speak without words. Jeb froze, axe held midair. The hair rose on his neck before the horses appeared on the ridge. 3 riders. Dark coats. Guns low at the hip. Eyes that didn't blink much. Annie was out back, pinning linens to a line. Jeb glanced at her. Not panicked, just ready. She dipped her head and slipped inside, like they'd practiced in silence. The men came in at an easy pace. One swung down. Heavy boots. Dust-caked face. He spat and said he'd come for the girl. Said she belonged to someone back in Prescott. Said Jeb had no right to keep what wasn't his. Jeb didn't twitch. He asked, calm as a pond, if they had papers. They laughed. The one on foot took a step toward the porch. His hand twitched near his belt, just enough to count as a mistake. A shotgun racked inside the cabin. Annie stood in the doorway, bare feet planted, the old double barrel lowered, but steady. The man went still. Jeb stepped forward, boots crunching in the yard. He didn't draw steel. He reached out, took the man's wrist, and twisted slow until the fellow knelt. Then Jeb leaned close and said something only Annie heard. The other 2 wheeled their horses and left without a word. The one on the ground stood up slow, shoulders sagging, pride cracked. He didn't look back. That night, Annie sat by the window with the shotgun across her lap. Jeb didn't tell her to put away. Some nights, staying alive means reminding the world that you still remember how. If you felt that knot in your gut right there, press subscribe. This trail isn't done. Dawn came clean. Jeb poured 2 cups. One black and strong, same as always. The other with a touch of honey. Just how Annie liked it. She hadn't asked for it. He just noticed the way her eyes softened when the bite was gone, the way she cradled the mug with both hands, like warmth meant more than heat. The sun climbed over the hills. For once, the wind kept to itself. No hoofbeats. No dust. No threats on the edge of sight. They sat shoulder to shoulder on the porch, saying nothing. Sometimes peace doesn't yell. It shows up, sits down, and waits for you to notice. The night before, Annie had taken a sack off for good. Her face still told every story carved into it. But her eyes were different. They didn't plead anymore. They noticed. For the first time in years, Jeb let himself think that maybe not everything lost stays lost. Around noon, he handed her a shovel. Together, they planted a strip of tomatoes out back. Not because they had to. Because it felt right to grow something. Some folks think love has to be loud, with roses and songs. Often, love is a small garden, quiet, dug with sore hands, watered by habit, grown in steady silence. Maybe that's enough. Maybe it always was. So here's a question. What would it take for you to see a person not as the world labels them, but as who they could still become? If you've ever felt like life left a mark too deep to hide, maybe this story is yours. If it meant something, hit that like button. It helps more than you might guess. And if you want more tales like this, plain, rough, and true, tap subscribe. Out here in the dust and sun and long quiet of the West, not every tale burns out in flames. Some begin with coffee and a second chance. There are things a man can forget. The bite of his first whiskey. The name of a friend he lowered into the ground. Even the sound of his wife laughing through the kitchen window. But some things won't fade. Like the weight of a child going still in his arms. Jeb Carter hadn't spoken the name for years. Lily, his daughter, 8. Fever took her in 2 nights. Nothing he tried worked. He had been a soldier. A man who lived through hard times. But he wasn't a healer. After she died, he left Kansas. Rode west without a map or a goal, just rode to get away from that cough chasing him. He ended up in the Arizona territory, alone, scraped thin, quieter than the desert itself. One plain day, he saw something beneath a split mesquite that stopped his horse cold. Something moving, slow and wrong. Not animal. Not man. A girl sat there with her hands tied, head drooped. A burlap sack over her face like someone tried to erase her. She made no sound at first. Then she whispered, "Please don't take the sack off." No fear in it. Only a long, deep tired. Like she'd said those words 100 times and nobody listened. Jeb didn't rush. Didn't speak. He stood with dust pushing at his boots and stared at her like he was looking at a grave not yet closed. Then he moved. Kneeling, he reached for the sack. She flinched, but let him. When it came off, her face told a hard story. Scars down one side. Skin torn in places. One eye swollen purple. The other wide and hollow. But it wasn't the wounds that cut him the worst. It was the look inside, that one clear eye. Not fear. Not pain. A quiet acceptance. The kind you see in someone who thinks no one will ever see them and care. As Jeb met that stare, something in him shifted. What he saw under that sack was something the world had tossed away. He wasn't about to leave her there. The whole ride back, the girl kept silent. Jeb asked nothing. He wasn't the kind to push a person already wrung out. He rode slow, let her lean if she needed, and let the silence do its best work. His cabin sat tucked by a dry creek near Ruby. Old timbers. No neighbors for miles. Only birds and time. When they arrived, he helped her down with care. She walked on her own, wobbly but proud, like she forgot how to accept a hand. He offered water. She didn't drink. Offered bread. She turned away. She picked a corner instead, slid the old sack back over her head, and folded in with her knees to her chest like the room was still closing. Jeb didn't argue. He left a bowl on the table, stepped out, and split wood like every evening. Same rhythm, same beat, with one ear tuned to the hush inside. At dusk he went in. The bowl was empty. Morning came, same story. No words. No eye contact. But the bread went. then beans, then coffee. Little signs, too thin to call trust, thick enough to call hope. By night 3, he left his army coat near her spot. By morning, it warmed her legs. The sack still covered her face, but she sat taller and breathed fuller. These are the signs you learn if you've watched someone quit before. Jeb had. Sometime between sunrise and the 4th set of shadows, he looked at her not as a problem, but as a person stepping back from the edge. There's a point with broken creatures when the shaking stops long enough for them to meet your eyes. That's when you know you're close. When she finally looked at him like that, even with the sack on, he understood one thing. She wasn't finished yet. He also knew if the quiet lasted, the truth would come hunting. And truth can cut deeper than any scar. By day 5, her words came more. Still quiet, but steady, like water finding a path through dry stone. Her stepfather's name surfaced first, James Craig. Jeb didn't ask. Annie, she said it while peeling potatoes, like letting poison into the stew. Her voice held steady. Her fingers shook. She told how it started after her mama passed. How James said she was cursed. Said the mark on her face was a punishment. Locked her away. Then the beatings. Then worse. She ran one day. The town never wondered why. They called her a witch and struck their matches. Jeb kept quiet. He nodded and walked to the porch, coffee cooling in his grip. Something in him went very still, the kind of still that can break a man or someone else. Next morning, he hitched the horse and told Annie he was riding to Tombstone for supplies. She didn't ask for a thing. She passed him the last of the flour and went back to chopping wood. Tombstone bustled, miners, traders, drifters with heavy eyes. Jeb stepped into the store, nodded at the clerk, and picked what little his coins could cover. Then he heard it, 2 men by the oat sacks, snickering. Talking about a girl with a devil's face hiding in the hills. Saying the old man with her must pay in silver to touch her. Jeb didn't stare. He set the basket down. Walked over, slow and even. When he finished, the sack of oats wore more blood than grain. Nobody tried to stop him. Nobody said a word. He paid for bread and headed home, hands split and angry. And he didn't ask. She saw and brought a cloth dipped in cold water. No talk. Just pressed it to his knuckles until the throbbing eased. If the price of quiet was a broken jaw, Jeb knew the real bill hadn't arrived. Sometimes justice isn't a speech. It's the silence hanging in the air after the crack. If that hit your chest, consider subscribing. Because what's coming will test every bit of that sense of justice. It started with a whistle. Not a bird. Not the wind. A sharp 2-note call, the sort men use when they want to be heard without speaking. Jeb stopped, axe raised. The hair on his neck stood up before the riders showed on the ridge. 3 of them. Dark coats. Guns low. Eyes that didn't blink. Annie was out back, hanging sheets. Jeb sent her a look. Not fear. Ready. She nodded and slipped inside like they'd planned it that way. The riders drew near. One climbed down, heavy steps, dirty face. He spat. Said he came for the girl. Said she belonged to a man in Prescott. Said Jeb was hiding what wasn't his. Jeb asked, quiet as Sunday morning, if they had papers. They laughed. The one on the ground stepped to the porch, his hand twitching close to his belt. That was his mistake. A shotgun racked from inside. Annie stood in the doorway, barefoot, steady, the old double barrel aimed low but sure. The man froze. Jeb walked forward, boots crunching. He didn't draw. He took the man's wrist and twisted firm until the stranger knelt. Jeb leaned close and said something only Annie heard. The other 2 turned their mounts and left without talk. The kneeling man climbed up slow, shoulders heavy, pride gone. He didn't look back. That night Annie kept the shotgun across her lap by the window. Jeb didn't tell her to stop. Sometimes, to stay, you have to show you still know how. If that moment grabbed you, hit subscribe. This trail hasn't ended. Morning poured soft across the porch. Jeb poured 2 coffees. One black strong. One with a touch of honey, just how Annie liked it. She never asked. He noticed how her eyes relaxed when the bitter left. How she held the cup with both hands like the heat meant home. The sun lifted. The wind went quiet. No riders. No dust. No threats at the edge of sight. They sat, saying nothing. Sometimes peace doesn't shout. It just arrives, sits, and waits to be seen. Last night Annie had taken the sack off for good. Her face still carried every memory. But her eyes had changed. They didn't plead. They understood. For the first time in a long time, Jeb let himself hope that maybe things lost don't always stay lost. Around noon, he passed her a shovel. They planted a patch of tomatoes out back. Not because they were hungry. Because it felt right to grow something new. A lot of people think love is big and loud, covered in roses and music. But love can be a garden, quiet, dug with tired hands, watered every day, grown in silence. Maybe that's enough. Maybe it always has been. So I'll ask you, what would it take for you to see someone not for what folks said they were, but for who they could still become? If you felt like life stamped a mark too deep to heal, maybe this story was meant for you. If it touched you, tap like. It helps more than you know. And if you want more stories like this, real and rough, subscribe. Out here in dust, sun, and silence, not every story ends in fire. Some begin with coffee and a second chance.